Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Modern Day Rosie discussion series. I'm Danielle Barrow. I'm the Chief of Staff at Winning for Women, and really excited to be joined today by one of our board members, former Senator Kelly Ayotte, as well as our special guest speaker, U.S. Representative Liz Cheney. Kelly, Chairwoman Cheney, thanks so much for being here today. And also a big thanks to all of our Winning for Women members who are watching and listening in from all across the country. The goal of Winning for Women's Modern Day Rosie initiative is really to recognize and celebrate the contributions of conservative women who are stepping up to lead during our current crisis. Chairwoman Cheney, you've been a standout leader in Congress and really excited to have you with us today to hear about some of the unique contributions you're making during the COVID pandemic. So with that, and without further ado, Kelly, I will turn it over to you to kick off our conversation with this week's Rosie, Chairwoman Liz Cheney.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. And I just want to thank all our Winning for Women members that are on the line right now. You really make our organization strong, and it couldn't be more important right now to get strong conservative women elected throughout the country. And I'm really honored to be here to have this discussion today with someone I admire so much, a strong conservative woman who is the third-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. She is chairwoman of the Republican Conference. She is, before she served in Congress representing Wyoming as its sole representative, she, before that, was a national security expert, worked in the State Department. So even before she joined Congress, she is someone that I know I look to and many others in the national security space as a true expert. And so it's going to be phenomenal to hear from her today about not only the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and what Congress is doing, what she specifically is working on, but also she has been someone who long before this pandemic has been talking about holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable for their lack of transparency, for their violation of human rights, for the things that they do that hurt us economically. And if you think about the Chinese role in this pandemic, the failure to tell people what they knew early on, the start of this pandemic in China, and so many other areas that we're concerned about the actions of the Chinese Communist Party. And so it's going to be wonderful to hear from Congresswoman Cheney about those issues today. So we've been able to hear from all of you of some of the questions that you're concerned about. And let me just end, as we start to ask Congresswoman Cheney these questions, just by thanking her for her incredible service to our nation. We are so fortunate to have a leader like her representing not only her own state, but our whole country. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart here in New Hampshire, but I know for everyone on the line. And so why don't we hear from Congresswoman Cheney, and we'll start with a question that came in from one of our supporters in New York, and just wondered about with Congress working together to get out the funding from the Paycheck Protection Act and many of these other efforts. There's been discussion about a third wave of stimulus, and whether you think that will happen, when that might occur, and will it include something having to do with infrastructure, which I know is important to many businesses across the country?
Well, let me just start by, first of all, thanking you, Kelly. Thank you for your service to the nation, for everything that you did and continue to do, all your hard work, both in the Senate, helping us get some of our great Supreme Court justices confirmed, and all the really important national security work that I know you did, particularly with Senator McCain, and Senator Graham. And so thank you very much for all of that. And thank you to Winning for Women and for the opportunity for all of you to have the chance to talk to you today and to hear from you. It is really unprecedented times, as Senator Ayotte said. We are in a situation where we're facing this simultaneous public health crisis, economic crisis, and really trying to work as best we can in Congress to make sure that the resources are available now to help people get through the crisis. So I think everybody is probably familiar with what we've been able to do generally so far in terms of the Paycheck Protection Program, the income support programs that have gone directly, checks directly to people, what we've been able to do for our hospitals across the country. We're really focused now extensively on our ag producers, both those of us who represent states that have heavy agriculture, but also what's happening with our meat processing plants around the country. And so I'm sure you probably saw the president issue the executive order yesterday saying that, we're going to make sure that those meat processing plants stay open, that those are essential industries. So we really have been, working both while you're dealing with the public health piece of this and all the challenges around whether or not Congress can convene, how we convene. That's been working in different ways. I have to say that I'm not thrilled with the extent to which the Democrats, led by Speaker Pelosi, have just sort of been kicking the can down the road and not really fully addressing whether or not we convene in person or whether or not we convene remotely. The House of Representatives needs to convene. And so we've been coming into session for single votes or for 2 votes. In leadership, we've been doing a number of meetings with the administration, some in person, some by phone. But, Congress really does have an important oversight role to play that we're not playing right now because they really have not come up with, they haven't addressed the issue. I think they've sort of been hoping for the best. You saw.
I thought it was interesting that, Speaker Pelosi cancels the House coming in. I believe you're going to come in next week. And as I understand it, Leader McConnell is going to have the Senate come in. So you're right. The oversight function that I know you've taken so seriously is so important for Congress.
It really is. And if you think about when Congress is most needed, we're, and particularly, obviously I'm a creature of the House of Representatives. And if you think about the House as the people's house, as the place where people, was intended that this is sort of the most direct expression of the hopes and dreams and voice of the people. When you're going through a crisis like this, that's exactly when we're most needed. And so to have sort of put us on the sidelines is, I think it's not a responsible way to operate. It really is in the hands of the majority right now. And I think they're demonstrating that they can't handle the responsibility and the authority that they have.
I agree with you. So we need to work to get our members so that the Republicans can be in charge again. That would be nice.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, so in terms of the next round of funding, we'll see what happens on it. I think that most of us, certainly I know this is my view, and most of us in the majority or in the minority and the Republican leadership in the House, we really want to see the funding that we've already appropriated be allocated before we move to another tranche of funding. This has been absolutely a crisis that we've had to provide resources for, but it's doing, it's going to have a significant impact on our debt. And I think while it's very important that we do it and we provide the support, we have to be careful because we know the Democrats want to use it to get a number of their priorities, which don't have anything to do with COVID, but to get those passed. And a lot of those include things like the Green New Deal, which couldn't pass on their own, didn't pass when Leader McConnell put them up for a vote in the Senate. But they're going to try to get those through now. So
let's face it, would be disastrous for our economy and now which needs all the help it can get.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So we'll see. I would expect that we do want to see, I know the president is very focused on infrastructure. And I think that would be at the top of the list of priorities for the Republicans. But again, I am going to work to make sure that we really kind of slow down here and do what's needed to get over the crisis we're facing now without doing too much more. And we have to make sure that we're addressing issues connected to the military. And so we've had all of these supplementals without any real additional spending, in terms of what our armed services needs.
Yeah, thank you for your role in the Armed Services Committee. That is so important. For our men and women in uniform and their families, and we really appreciate it. And we have some questions, of course, focused on the work that you're doing to hold China accountable. And Gianna from Nebraska has asked, what are some real consequences the United States can impose on China for its role in perpetuating the COVID-19 pandemic? We know through lack of transparency, we know that the pandemic started there. And do you see bipartisan support for holding China accountable?
I do. I think that it's one of the issues that does bring both sides together. And it's an issue that brings, frankly, the world together. When you see the devastating impact that COVID has had in terms of, hundreds of thousands of people have died globally. The global economy has been brought to a standstill. And you will see, and you're already beginning to see things like the Japanese government announcing that it will begin to provide support for businesses, Japanese businesses that are willing to move their supply chain out of China. We need to really, I think, as a nation, we need to lead that effort, and we need to recognize what a different world we're living in. I think that people had begun to realize after a couple of decades of hoping that the Chinese would play a constructive role on the world stage if they were, as they, we let them into the WTO and their economy opened up. I think there was a lot of hope that they would want to be a responsible member of the community of nations. And unfortunately, we've seen that that's just not the case. I think the U.S. has to lead the effort to hold them accountable. I think holding them accountable will take a number of different forms. I think we need to move supply chains. We need to move particularly our pharmaceutical supply chains.
Right.
And I think that's just, when you start to think about the extent to which we don't produce generic antibiotics, we don't produce penicillin in this country. And it's not accidental. The Chinese have basically been, they've had an agenda to be able to corner the market and produce these pharmaceuticals for years now. It's the same thing when you look at intellectual property across the board and what they've done to steal that. But we can no longer, I think, allow them to play the role they've been playing. And I think our message to them has to be, you unleashed this on the world. And that doesn't mean you did it on purpose. It doesn't mean it was intentional, but it was intentional to lie about it. It was intentional when they knew that the virus had human-to-human transmission in Wuhan. They stopped travel from Wuhan to China, the rest of China, but they didn't stop it from Wuhan to the rest of the world. They've disappeared the doctors who tried to warn about it. They continue to refuse to cooperate in ways that we really need for information about the virus itself. And I think the message is you can't expect to be part of the community of nations if that's the way you're going to operate. And so from an economic standpoint, we also, I think, need to look very closely at what they've been doing from a military standpoint. And they've gone to school on us. So they really began about the time of the first Gulf War, looking at what are those particular weapon systems and tactics that we use that give us such ability to project our force and to defend the homeland. And they've gone to school on it, and they've developed systems that can get around our defenses and systems that challenge our ability to project our power. And those are all things we need to really focus as we're looking at the next round of defense budgets and defense spending on how do we make sure that the Chinese understand that we are not going to let them control the rules of the road and control the global world order.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership on that. As I think about their actions in the South China Sea, and I think about what we've discovered with our supply chains, it's so important that you're going to focus on that, and we really appreciate your leadership. Gloria in Arizona had asked, how do we hold China accountable without them further antagonizing our supply chains, given the pandemic we're in? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we need to recognize that that it is a direct threat against the United States when, as they did about 3 weeks ago now in their state-run media, they threatened to withhold medications we need. And we cannot allow ourselves to be blackmailed. And I think we have to be clear. Some of it comes down to our how we deal with, as a government, pharmaceutical companies, some of which are based in the United States, but for a variety of reasons, produce either the medicine part of the pharmaceutical or the chemical part of the pharmaceutical are produced in China. I think that we need to be clear with respect to medicines, for example, that our Defense Department, that our service members need. those should be made in the United States. We need to decide as a country what are the fundamental things that we need to have here stockpiled. And in some instances, those medications, in my view, cannot even be produced in allied countries, because what will happen is, as we've begun to see here, if you have a global pandemic, every country is going to look out for itself. And so, even nations that are our friends and our closest allies, they will take care of their citizens first. And so I think for certain, not for everything by any means, but for certain key pharmaceuticals in particular, they just have to be made here, and we have to be able to stockpile them here. And we have to recognize there may be some economic cost in the near term, but it's crucial for us in order to defend ourselves. And I think because, as I said before, what the Chinese Communist Party has done, they have not done only to the United States, they've done it to the globe, to the world, to every nation around the world. And so there is a united front, particularly if America steps up to lead it, to make sure this doesn't happen again, and to make sure that they're held accountable.
I certainly think that this is so important, because you're absolutely right. We can't be in a situation like this again. We have to have our own domestic supply so that we can rely on here. So thank you for focusing on that issue. We had a question from Brenda in DC, and it was a great question. Given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, what steps are you taking to be able to connect with your constituents, even though we have to apply social distancing and other things that, I'm sure you love to go out and shake your constituents' hands and go to the fairs and do all of that. So how are you handling that?
Well, the world has really changed, as you know. And so I spend a huge amount of time doing this on video calls and conference calls with folks all across the state. I think particularly, depending on sort of where we are as the funds are appropriated, working with the hospital association, working with our cattlemen, working with our county commissioners and our chambers of commerce, making sure that everybody has access so that we can both provide feedback. I mean, as you know, Kelly, when you represent a rural state, those needs are different than they are for the New Yorks and the Californias. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, helping to make sure that our needs are met, and that the administration and the agencies are focused on how the programs need to be designed for our smaller communities and our rural areas. I also spent a lot of time as the House Republican Conference Chair, helping to get information out to all of our members, all the Republican members of the House. And so we do conference calls where they're focused on sort of legislation and organizational issues. We also have a new program we've started on China policy, and so we have calls focused on supply chain issues and other aspects of that. And really working to just make sure that everybody understands the challenges that we're facing, and understands what the next round is, what's going to be necessary. And then we also have the whole range of issues at the beginning, when sort of the beginning of March, when things really began to sort of shut down. Many of us in the Congress had constituents who were having a hard time. They were overseas trying to get back. We spent a lot of time working with the State Department, for example, to try to get those constituents back home. So there's a lot that we do. It's all right now, for the most part, virtual. It's all online. And we'll sort of see, I think gradually that will change. But for now, it's not the normal sorts of events that all of us have been used to.
Well, I know that you've been advocating strongly for the people of Wyoming, and those of us who also have rural parts of our state appreciate that advocacy, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all way to address these things. And so meeting your constituents' needs is so important. So thank you for that. And I think in a similar vein, Trish from Massachusetts has asked, how do we balance, I think this is a very tough question, but one that I know policymakers are facing, how do we balance reopening the economy in areas that are hard hit by the virus, along with maintaining public health, because we obviously are in this situation where people are hurting. They're out of work. They want to get back to their routine. We know we have the public health concerns, and we know the president is trying to balance both those things. And what are your thoughts on that? It's not an easy question.
Yeah, it is. It's a very difficult question. I think first of all, recognizing that our federal system is actually very well designed to make sure in a situation like this that while there is definitely guidance that comes from the president, from the CDC, from the administration, ultimately it's the governors in each state, it's the local officials in each state that for the most part are making these decisions. And I think that's how it should be. I think what we have to do is recognize, first of all, that the virus is there, and that we have to be in a position where we've developed the therapies that we need to treat the virus, obviously a vaccine, and also expand our testing so that people really can have the confidence to know if they have had it, if they have antibodies, and make sure that as we begin to open up in some areas, we can do that safely. And I think we do have to be careful. Absolutely, the economic consequences have been devastating, but I think it's important to realize as we begin to open up, we have to do it in a way where we're able to take additional measures again if we need to, because I think, you could see things like you've seen, for example, at the Smithfield processing plant in South Dakota, where you get an outbreak in a plant like that. Even you've got a state like South Dakota, which had not had many instances of COVID, but all of a sudden you have an outbreak, and you have to be able to deal with that and recognize that ultimately the people that I think really are at risk as we begin to open up are the doctors and the nurses in our hospitals and those who are on the front lines. And
They're
so
horrific, aren't they? I mean,
it's just amazing. Yeah. And so we really have to, this isn't a matter of sort of just saying, we're tired of sheltering at home. It's time to open up again, because we have to understand that we're putting other people at risk. And so we have to be very responsible and recognize what they're doing for all of us. So I think it can happen gradually. I think it will happen that way in different parts of the country, but people need to be prepared that you could see a rise. You probably will see a rise in cases, and we have to be able to manage our own activities and manage our activities as a nation so that we don't end up in a situation where our healthcare system is overwhelmed and we're putting those healthcare providers at risk.
Right. Thank you. These are really challenging questions. And, I do appreciate that our founders had the brilliance of setting up a federal and state system and having different states have different needs and allowing the governors to have discretion here is important also.
Yeah.
Appreciate your comments on that. We have a question we got a question from Arizona. What actions are being taken to ensure that the PPP funds, and this goes to your oversight, really comments earlier, are received by those most in need? And I think what she's trying to get at is this idea where some really large businesses got that money.
Yeah.
And now this second round, the importance of focusing it on the very small businesses that have a hard time getting financing from other places.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I think for a whole range of reasons, you see some of what happened. It seems, first of all, the vast majority of the loans that have gone out have gone to the kinds of businesses we know need them.
And by the way, I can tell you that there have been a lot of businesses in New Hampshire that are small businesses that these funds have been very important to, that are truly small businesses.
Yeah. And so it's made a huge difference. I think it's been a really important program. In some cases where institutions or businesses received money and they probably shouldn't have, that in a number of cases, they've decided they're going to turn the money back. We've seen that, I think, with Harvard has made that announcement. I think you saw some other large businesses say, okay, we're going to turn the money back. And the Treasury Department announced, I think just yesterday, that they're going to be working with SBA now. And they basically put out a statement reminding people who these resources are intended for, not to apply if you don't qualify. And they've also said they're going to institute a review process for any loan over $2 million or $2 million and over. And so that, I think, will be important. That will help make sure people recognize and understand that, you know, this program was set up unbelievably quickly. I mean, you know, Kelly,
it's incredible how quick this has gone. I mean, you know, the federal government moves slowly. This has not been slow.
No, and they did something like as many loans in 14 days as they normally would do in 14 years. I mean, it has just been unbelievable. And of course, when you do that, not every loan is going to be perfect, but there is a process that's in place. In addition to what the Treasury Department announced, there are 8 separate committees when you count the standing committees of the House and Senate, and you count the oversight bodies that we created when we passed the CARES Act. There are 8 committees that exist. That was even before Speaker Pelosi set up her committee last week, which is really, I think, another just a partisan attempt to attack the president. Crazy. Already 8 committees to conduct oversight on this. So people that are taking money who shouldn't be are going to be caught. And
and they'll be held accountable.
Exactly.
I mean, you've already seen the public outcry, and that's holding them accountable.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say that as we face this pandemic, and I look at, you know, some of the partisan tactics of the speaker and some on the other side of the aisle, it's really unfortunate because this is a time for us to come together as Americans. And I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I just wanted to ask you just real quickly, what gives you hope right now? What, you know, we're in a very, you know, challenging time with this pandemic. We're all making our sacrifices, and some have, you know, had family members they've lost. But what gives you hope? As I see also some great things that make us such a great country.
Yeah, it is. I mean, thank you for asking that question, because I think it's absolutely. I mean, you know, this is comparable to 9/11. And in terms of the nature of the crisis that we're living through. And and obviously many more Americans have died because of this virus. So it is a very difficult time. But, you know, I was in the Oval Office on Friday with the president when he signed the CARES Act, the second round. And, you know, as you well know, Kelly, when you're in the Oval Office, the portraits of our founders hang there. And
inspiring.
So it is, you know, and seeing over the fireplace is a portrait of George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. Their portraits are all there, Abraham Lincoln. And it was really, it just gave me such a feeling of comfort, just realizing, listen, you know, we are going through unbelievably difficult times, but we've been through difficult times before. And the republic that our founders created is incredibly strong and resilient, and the people of this nation are, and we're going to come out of this stronger and better, and we'll prevail. And we just, you know, we all have to make sure that we're doing our part right now. But I do have tremendous hope because of who we are and what this nation is.
Thank you. And thank you. You give me hope, and thank you for your incredible leadership for our nation. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairwoman, for your time today. And echoing Kelly, really appreciate your continued service and leadership throughout this time. Kelly, thank you as well for joining us today. And also a big thanks to all of our Winning for Women members. We're looking forward to many more of these conversations to come. So keep an eye on your email for our next Rosie, which we will be announcing in the coming days. But in the meanwhile, we hope everyone stays safe, stays healthy, and have a great day.